Hi, everyone. So data quality, it's kind of just sexy the way it comes out, doesn't it? But actually, you think 2 years ago, if we talked about data quality, we'd have a pretty, we wouldn't have many people here. But it's become so critical. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this initiative that we've been doing with AMEC. Very briefly, Converseon, we actually built our first machine learning model in 2008, so for natural language processing. And today, we still do advanced natural language processing and context engineering, and we have integrations with folks who are here, like Cision and Meltwater and others. So we kind of make this advanced technology available there. We've been, for many, many years, we were talking about data quality. It's been kind of the core of who we are as an organization. And for many years, people would say, it's kind of good enough, right? And that's changed. That's changed dramatically over the last couple of years with the rise of generative AI, because these small errors become like these massive problems, right? So we have to get the data right. So we are on a little bit of a journey. So we actually started, we joined the Global Data Quality Initiative, and I don't know how many of you know about this. This is about 10 industry organizations from SMR, the Insights Association, and they gathered together because they realized that in the survey world, they have a problem. Like 25 to 40% of surveys are fraud, right? But what they didn't take on was the unstructured data, which is 90% of all data being created. So AMEC stepped in, and we're leading the global initiative to establish principles for unstructured data. And this is what I'm going to go through with you a little bit today. We did a first paper back in, when was it? It was the fall last year. And we actually did an update now. So in addition to what you see today, there is a white paper, has a lot of detail in it. Some things kind of evolved very much. The good news is that the principles themselves didn't change, but as we wrote this, we saw the emergence of GEO, right? The greater reliance on LLM. So we kind of accented some additional topics around all of this. So where are we today? As I mentioned, 90% of all the world's data is unstructured, it's growing quickly. Less than half of it is actually being used because it's so noisy and messy. We've done a benchmark study of multiple different brands in terms of sentiment analysis, which we're all very fixated on sentiment analysis, and I'm going to argue we should not be. But it's about 65%. And it's not because, by the way, that those models are really bad, but they're asking a specific question, is what's the general opinion of a document, right? As opposed to what is the express opinion towards very specific things. So it's not really good enough. And in the meantime, because of this is the lifeblood for a lot of GenAI. So in the rush to get to AI, we kind of forgot about this kind of data layer, right? The structure between the data itself and also what's happening on the GenAI side. So we talk about the rise of context engineering. The good news is context engineering is now replacing AI as the buzzword, I think. So they talk about context becoming the word of the year. And context engineering is something that Jim was talking about yesterday. We have all this data, but how do we structure meaning into that data layer, right? And I'm going to argue that many of you have a very specific, important role to be able to do that, because you're sitting at the front lines of your organizations and you understand context from your point of view, right? So how do we get the algorithms to understand that? So we talk about what is getting AI data ready. What does that actually really mean? There's actually three layers to it. So we have to structure the data for meaning. This is sentiment, this is a bunch of other things, all the metadata that's associated with the data. It includes things even like knowledge graphs and ontologies and how things relate to each other. We have to spoon feed that. I often say, we actually don't have a problem with hallucinating GenAI. We actually are just confusing it, because the data we're feeding into the GenAI is not structured correctly, and they don't really understand it. It's only as good as the data. So AI, according to Gartner, there's three parts of it. We're structuring the data for more meaning. We're measuring it so that we actually understand how good it is, and have only 20% of companies have a true data quality structure. And then we're governing it. So we're keeping an eye on it, and humans are governing it. So these are the three elements of it. So this is where context engineering comes in, and as Gartner says here too, that we talk about prompt engineering, we talk about all these other things, but the truth is, without context engineering, none of that actually works. And so this is where I will argue many of you need to become, we call context engineers, meaning architects, providing the structure for your organizations so you can understand this part. And there's actually two parts to this. There's the GEO part, which because you're structuring the data for how other people want to see you. And then you're using it for yourselves of how do you want to get the data for your own intelligence and insights. Jensen Wang just said the other day, he predicted that 90% of all data, all knowledge is going to be produced by GenAI in the next 3 years. I don't know if you agree with that, but we better get the data right if he's even partially correct. So there's a little bit of a litmus test around all of this. I would say, like, number one is, how do you know actually if you're doing a good job? Number one is it from the source that you actually think it's coming from? And this is a problem because in all the data collections and everything else, there's a lot of data providers. Do we know it's actually from humans, for example, or from a specific type of media? So data lineage is a very important part of this. And I'll tell you a real example of a big beverage brand, not the one who's here, but they were doing a sentiment analysis that was a core KPI for their CMO. And they were giving a sentiment score. We decomposed it through an algorithm. And it turned out that actually 22% of their data that they were marking for positive sentiment was actually their own promotional data, right? Because these data streams have a lot of different types of data in them. So get the right data, number one. Number two, is the metadata actually accurate? Your sentiment, more than just sentiment, attitudes, all these other things. Are you actually capturing the expressed opinions in the underlying data in an accurate way? And I would argue that we actually have a responsibility to make sure that we do that. And that's not enough, because we can live in this world of vanity metrics. Does the data actually have any type of predictive capability to the real world? Can we predict behavioral data, cells, whatever it might happen to be? It's very important that we do that, because that grounds this data in a world where we're going to be surrounded by all this Gen AI. Does it have predictive capabilities? And the fourth, I would argue, is you can have the greatest data quality in the world, but if it's not trusted in your organization, you're going nowhere, right? So how do you build trust within this data? So if you could get through these areas of criteria, if you're saying yes to these things, you're doing a good job. So we came up with principles of how you get there, right? So you're getting lots of principles today, and these actually align with the GEO principles in many ways, and the Barcelona principles. And I'll talk a little bit about that briefly. I'm actually going to go through each one, and so I'll go through pretty quickly, right? Number one, this sounds obvious, but it's not. Accuracy has to be the North Star of your organization, right? Good enough is no longer good enough. And that requires senior sponsorship in the organization to say, we are going to put accuracy above some of our other requirements. Maybe it's a little bit harder, maybe it's a little more work, but we believe that this is absolutely critical. 60 to 65% sentiment is not acceptable for this type of world. There is a global data quality commitment pledge to saying we as an organization are going to do everything we can to make sure that we have the best data quality and accuracy. And I'm going to encourage you guys to consider signing it. So that's number one. Number two, you can only manage what you measure. So how many people know what your data accuracy is? You probably don't. It's like I look at it, it looks kind of interesting, or I see some errors. But a quantitative approach to measure the quality of your data is absolutely essential. So there's lots of different ones you can use, and we're not defining which ones you need to use. But I would say one that we often use is something called the F1 score. It's precision and recall. And so in precision, how well does the algorithm actually predict the gold standard of humans, right? And I can have like high precision if I only pick the most obvious stuff. Recall is how many opinions are in that actual document. So you want to capture more opinions, but as you capture more opinions that are a little more nuanced, your precision goes down. So it's the average of the two. And again, in the paper, we're not dictating what your score has to be, but we say about 0.80 F1 score is about research grade, right? So just kind of keep that in your back pocket. So that's one. Data quality is a collaboration. And I think this is a really big one. We are not passive, no longer. We are not passive consumers of this data. You guys are both producers and consumers of this data. In communications, every piece of data that's being created is becoming training data in many cases for these LLMs, right? So you have to start to think about how do we structure this data before I get to the dashboard? How do I structure the data before I get to GenAI? And you are the domain experts. You deal with language all the time. You deal with nuance. You understand these things. You should be doing the engineering of this context for your particular organization, right? And this is a big, big deal. And I think it's a very exciting for the world of communications and measurement. So, you know, and I don't know how many of you are doing it, because I'll also call out some of the platforms here, Cision and Meltwater and others, because people think, well, you know, how do I change my sentiment? I can't do that. You can. They're actually opening up the platforms. Thank you, guys who are here, for third-party models, other models, because they realize one model cannot satisfy all needs. I have to pick it by domain. You know, language differs by domain, by brand, by use case. The word small is good for smartphones, bad for hotel rooms. They're giving you choice in your data so that you can actually structure this data so you get to your meaning, not a shallow understanding, but to your business reality, your precise business reality. And that is absolutely the game changer. Accuracy is not a point in time. You don't just measure once and then forget it. Models degrade, the data drifts, there's new language, there's new concepts. Once you start to measure this process, you need to do it on a regular basis, right? So this is a really important point too, like put a system in place. And again, we're not telling you which system to do, but have a system. This is an example of something we do. We actually have an algorithm that will actually look at the data and it'll score it across everything, around F1 scores and others. And you do these report cards, like on a quarterly basis. Sometimes you do it weekly, sometimes you do it quarterly, sometimes you do it semi-annually. It kind of depends how important the data is. And this will kind of give you an idea of the governance that you need. Transparency and ethical are core. This is also aligns with the Barcelona principles, also the GEO principles. Understand, you know, ISO 20252, I don't know if any of you know this, Procter & Gamble requires all their market research companies in the world to abide by this, which talks about ethics and accuracy in their market research, right? We're calling, you know, this is the same type of thing. Have documentation, show what you do, have audits, validate your data, open it up, because this is where that creates trust. Because trust is, at the end of the day, one of the core metrics. So sentiment is very different than trust. You know, people may like something, but do I trust you as an organization? I would argue trust is the metric that every company needs to be measuring right now, because it is the grounding force. It's the accumulation of all the activities that you do. And in the world of AI, trust is going to be the grounding factor. You know, because GenAI is going to be producing all kinds of stuff. It's very difficult sometimes to say what's real, what's not, what's hallucinating, what's what. But humans, even though it's not perfect, are pretty good BS detectors. They still can figure it out, right? They are our grounding force in this world of GenAI. So, you know, consider adding that to all your other measurements. And of course, human governance is key. So this is interesting. So what is the gold standard? What is truth in this data, right? It's hard. With GenAI, it's going to be even harder. What we would argue, you see a lot of times things, you hear this term called LLM as a judge. So LLMs are evaluating other LLMs to kind of say if something's true or not. Well, the problem with that is the LLMs themselves are not really perfect arbitrators, are they, right? But in many ways, we are starting to see the power of deciding what is true and false through another LLM who we already know is inaccurate and has been trained on bad data, right? What we argue is humans, and this is trained humans who agree with each other, are the gold standard for accuracy in this world today, right? Don't cede it all to LLMs. They can be helpful, but humans still rule. They still need to govern, and this is absolutely critical as well, too. So I also want to just talk about, sentiment analysis. Bo Pang in 2002 came out with the paper, Sentiment Analysis of Machine Learning. It's still what we're fixated on, and it's an important metric. I'm not saying dismiss sentiment, but you guys know that outrage, frustration, and disappointment are different things, right? They're not just a negative sentiment. We now have language models that understand human language. They understand context, they understand slang, they understand how language differs by different industries. It is super sophisticated. go beyond. There's intensity. How strong is the opinion? There are attitudes. There's all kinds of other things. Lou, I don't know if he's still here from Pepsi. He got rid of sentiment completely, and he's using attitudes as a core KPI at Pepsi, right? This is the future. Because the more metadata you structure into this data, the more meaning you have. A simple sentiment model isn't structuring meaning, right? You need to have this other data associated with it. So ask yourself, is my sentiment good? Am I structuring meaning into my data? And the platforms are your partners in this process. I want to say something about the LLMs too, because I said there was a statistics earlier that actually the New York Times had 79%, or there's a 79% hallucination rate these days. So I really want to just caution, and this is probably another AMEC, because if you don't have enough principles, we'll give you more. What is the principles for how do you use the LLMs, right? So if you structure this data correctly, and through MCP connectors, you can use Claude and you use Gemini, and you will get research-grade data. You will get accurate, meaningful research-grade data without much hallucination. That's okay. Using foundational LLMs in the wild, who've been trained in the world, watch out, right? That's also an issue. So, and especially as GEO, maybe unethical GEO, you're going to see misinformation, disinformation. You're going to see these LLMs being manipulated, right? We have information and knowledge warfare coming in front of us. So just using it without this kind of structure would be challenging. So there are small language models, and this is actually what we use. And you're going to see a lot more about small language models. Because the problem about using an LLM for media intelligence, first of all, they're super expensive, right? We talked about that. They're opaque. You can't really customize them for a specific point of view. It's very, very difficult. You can't replicate it because the models are changing all the time. Small language models are purpose-built, and you're going to see them as companions with LLMs, that they still have the same context-aware algorithms. They understand things really well, but they're much more efficient, they're much more cost-effective, and they're purpose-built for specific activities. So that's where we're going to start to see, and in my view, there was the question earlier, Claude's brilliant, but you're going to see SLMs start to make their way more broadly into the marketplace. And then, so how do these things align? We broke this down, it's in the white paper, I'll send it to you. We're not just making these things up. There's an alignment in terms of philosophy, strategy, et cetera, that cuts across all of these principles. Grounded in ethics, grounded in truth, grounded in trust, so I'd encourage you to take a look at that. We also spend a lot of time just making sure that we align with other efforts across the organization. OECD, I don't know if they're here. There's one. There you go. You have some policies, right? There's the AI EU Act, there's others. And we spent time talking to them so we can kind of do some alignment around all of this as well. So finally, there's the data quality pledge. I would encourage you, this is something that started on the survey side, but it's basically saying, I as an organization are going to take all reasonable efforts to make sure that our data is accurate and meaningful, because it's important we do so. Because if we don't intercede and slop is generating more slop and misinformation is more information, it's going to be hard to get those horses back in the stable, right? So we got to move now. So, thank you guys. I appreciate it. I can take a couple questions, I guess. But I also have the white paper, and it's 17 pages. Sorry, but it's useful and it's detailed, and I'd love to have comments. This is an ongoing conversation, so your feedback and participation in this discussion is great. Thank you.
We have questions. Time for questions. Okay. I'm sure there are plenty. Thank you, James Crawford, for having your hand up first. We will take your questions. Just wait for a mic, please.
So thanks, Rob, for presenting a really important initiative. I know you've kind of covered this in your presentation, but to summarize, for practitioners that might think, PR practitioners, you might think data quality is not actually their responsibility. Just lay that down very simply. What three things could a PR person take away and deliver, both at maybe a strategic level and tell their teams?
No, absolutely. They're on the front lines and consumers of this data every day, right? So they should be working with whoever their producer of, who they're working with, to get to work with them for models that are specific to structure the meaning in their data. sometimes sometimes that happens downstream too. I see a lot more big organizations who come up with very sophisticated models that they want to do a bunch of different things. And so that's number one. I would also argue document level sentiment is, document level sentiment misses 2/3 of the data, right? Because it looks at the whole document and says, oh, it's generally positive or negative. But on average, there's at least 3 opinions within a particular document. So they're 2/3 blind, right? So start to be more curious about it, be more demanding about it, and then work with your partners to be able to structure this data a little bit, and work within your organization. Like be the steward, right? Be the steward for data quality, because you'll build trust within the organization too, with consumer intelligence and everything else, and you'll be adopted a little bit more broadly. There will be a follow-up paper that's very, very specific about how you can actually take action, and we'll share that with you when available. There's a question.
Todd.
Oh, Todd.
Thank you. Great presentation. Todd Murphy
Yeah.
is my name. I already know your name because it was on the screen. Yeah. I wanted to ask you the question about truth. Seems to be an emerging, probably the most important word I've heard over the last 2 days, the truth. You also used the word trust.
Yeah.
In a data quality situation, what are your thoughts on, in your attempt to make sure the quality is high and structure your data appropriately, is there a risk in potentially cracking the shell of earned media? That's already a third-party professional journalistic article document. Mm-hmm. Anything we do to that could potentially crack that shell and corrupt it. Even if I change a word, now it is no longer pure as the writer intended. Is there a risk in cracking that shell, or is there a tactic you've already identified to make sure that that's not cracked during quality discernment?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the purpose of these models is to accurately reflect the expressed opinion within those documents with great accuracy, right? I'd say right now, we're not doing a good job of that, right? Every entity, every aspect within that should be accurate and governed and everything as well too. So I think we're going to do a better job of kind of accurately reflecting and mirroring what's happening underneath. So I think that helps journalism. On truth and trust, like I often say, we can't build a truth algorithm, right? There's no way, right? But what we do is, what I find is when there are trusts, when you're actually measuring trust, that it's a pathway to truth. Truth is a very, very amorphous kind of concept. And so when we talk about truth, we're really talking about it symbolically. But, and I don't know if that fully answered your question, but.
No, the correlation between trust and truth, I love that.
Yeah.
I worry that if we get too aggressive in quality.
Can you wait for a mic? Can you give him the mic back
yeah.
just for the delegates who are virtual? Thank you.
I worry that if we get too aggressive in quality control of the data, do we risk cracking the authenticity of the article, whether it's a television news story or a newspaper article? Is there a risk in how we address quality of that data?
Well, I mean, quality is not meant to censor at all. It's just whatever data you have, you're structuring it for meaning, et cetera, and cleaning out. By the way, there's huge duplications and all other things which kind of mess up the GenAI as well too. So I think if we do this carefully, that's not a risk. You can overstructure maybe, right? But there's the fine line of just making sure that all your models are accurate and structured a certain way, and taking into account all the data that's available to you at that point in time. So
great,
I don't
yeah.
think so. Okay.
I appreciate the response.
Sure.
Thanks, Hud. Another question for Rob?
Well, thanks everyone. We're still here. I hope you all get involved with this initiative, and thanks to Jonah for the leadership in letting us do this, and the rest of the board who has helped a lot. And thanks everybody. Take care.
Thank you so much, Rob. Rob is very generous in saying that. Rob has done the absolute all work on this. We've validated it through some processes, but I mean, the way Converseon and they work with data, it's been really enlightening for so many of us to better understand that. So huge thanks to him for all of those efforts. This is a request, though, a call to action, if you will. Please go and take that pledge. please challenge your customers if they could commit to that pledge. Challenge your partners if they can commit to that pledge. It's really important to understand so that when people are trying to align with the many principles that have been outlined today, and the Barcelona principles, that there is a correlating point that we can point to around what their real commitment to data quality is. So when they are trying to build trust and credibility in their organization, this is a foundational piece. So it's really important.